Hi everyone, this week's Parsha is Parshat Chukat. And this week we actually have a packed Parsha. It starts off with the Parah Aduma, the red heifer, in which we've spoken about in past years. Very interesting, thought-provoking part of the Torah, followed by the Jews complaining about water and the death of Miriam. And then there's a war later on that goes on between Canaanite nations, and there's really a lot in this week's Parsha. But this week I wanted to primarily focus to the middle of the Parsha, in which we skip 38 years. Right? The Torah covers the first 2 years of the Jews leaving Egypt. Basically everything in the Torah that we've covered so far up until now has come from that time period. Now we're skipping 38 years to the first month of the 40th year of the Jews being in the desert. So they're getting ready to enter the land of Israel. Now what happens? They reach this place, Kadesh, and there Miriam dies, right? Almost immediately after this time jump. And Miriam dies, and the following verse, there's no mourning, no nothing. The following verse, the Jews are complaining that we have no water. Now, a lot of you are familiar with the story that Miriam was able to provide water for the people, and after her death, the well dried up, and there was no more water, right? And all the water that they had previously was in her merit. But I'd like to raise a question here, being that, right, the death of Miriam actually spirals into Moshe hitting the rock in this week's Parsha as well. Right? Again, it's a packed Parsha, which then prohibits him from entering the land of Israel. So why was Moshe so mad? Obviously the death of Miriam played into that, but why was he so angry that which caused him to then hit the rock because these Jews were complaining that we had no water? What was going on here? So I'd like to offer an idea here that's kind of connected to the whole chronology of this week's Parsha. So what happened in those 38 years from the beginning of this week's Parsha to the middle of this week's Parsha? Right? More specifically, kind of from the Exodus to this week's Parsha is probably a better metric to use. But what happened in those 38 years? Well, simply because of the sin of the spies, which we had recently, right? That whole generation of people that left Egypt died, and now a new generation is supposed to be entering Israel. Now what's happening here is we have essentially the whole generation that left Egypt is no longer, right? Now we have all new generation, Miriam, Moshe, and Aaron, essentially. And Miriam dies, and the Jews start complaining. And to Moshe, this kind of feels like I thought we were done with the complaining, or this is something of the generation of the past, the complaining. This is a new generation, a generation that's supposed to be ready to enter the land without this complaining nonsense. So to Moshe, once Miriam died, Miriam was one of the last positive influences from that generation. So to Moshe, it seems like, wow, this is what the Jews are taking from all these years in the desert. They're not taking from the good influences, they're only taking from the bad complaining influences. So hence, with this logic, that would cause Moshe to be very angry, to eventually then go hit the rock, and that causes him not to be able to enter the land as well. So I'd like to tie this together with a bracha to everyone, simply about complaining, that there's so much we could learn from our elders, from our role models, from everyone. But one lesson in particular, which seems to be the fatal flaw of Bnei Yisrael, of the Jewish people in this week's Parsha, is that complaining is really harmful. And that's something we could learn from Miriam, that when she was mentioned in the Torah, everything she did was phrased in a constructive way, not in a complaining one. Even with the wife of Moshe a few weeks ago, right? That was all in a constructive purpose, not a complaining one. So I think it's a nice, simple message to take away from this week's Parsha. And with that, I wish you all a happy July 4th and Shabbat Shalom.